Welcome everyone to the Cerini Associates Annual Nonprofit Conference. I'm Ken Cerini. I'm the managing partner of Cerini Associates. We're an 80-person regional firm located on Long Island in New York. I say that because we're able to do this remotely. Today, we don't just have participants from New York, but we have participants from all over the country. So that's awesome. I prefer to be in person so I could kind of interact with everyone, but unfortunately that's not the case. It's amazing how much things have changed since COVID, not just for this conference, but for everything, including the nonprofit sector. Nonprofit leadership has so many more challenges today than in the past. Think about it, from trying to lead 4 different generations of employees with truly diverse thought processes, to finding ways to fund their organizations because government funding just doesn't stretch the way it used to, from keeping abreast of changes in regulations and reimbursement methodologies, to attracting and engaging effective board members and more. It's a delicate slack line, and for those of you who don't climb, look that up. We walk to ensure that agencies we run, the communities we serve, and the sector as a whole remains vibrant and relevant. Sorry, I think I've gotten a little ahead of myself. Let me go over some administrative stuff first, and then we'll kind of dive into the presentation and some of the trends that we're seeing out there. Because we have so many people, it's going to be virtually impossible for us to unmute and engage in dialogue. Again, that's the part of the in-person presentations I love the most. Please open up active dialogue within the chat. Feel free to have discussions while we're going on. Toss in questions if you have them. We'll try to get to them throughout the day in terms of the presenters and stuff. Let's try to make this as interactive as we possibly can, even for a virtual conference. We will be offering 4 hours of CPE, accounting CPE credit for anyone who needs it. We'll be sending out the recordings of today's conference probably sometime next week. When you get that recording, we'll also have the evaluation form with it. If you want CPE credit, you have to fill out the evaluation form and send that back, and then you'll get your certificate in about a week or so after that. As always, we want to hear from you about what you liked and what you didn't like, what topics we should be covering in the future, and anything else you want to share with us so that ultimately at the end of the day, we can continue to be a resource to you and the nonprofit sector. At the end of each session, you'll be returned to the lobby where you can select your next session. For those of you who don't know, there's something called the Nonprofit Resource Hub. It's free to nonprofit organizations. I do encourage you, if you haven't heard of it or aren't part of it, to go and look up the Nonprofit Resource Hub, and we'll throw in the chat the website for it. Please just jump on and think about becoming a member. If you haven't been to our website, the Cerini Associates website, in a while, we have a lot of material on it for the nonprofit sector, including a board guide, which we'll be updating for our 3rd edition later this year. We have a fundraising guide, we have our annual trend report, and more. So again, jump on our website and take a look. I hope all of you guys have had 2 or 3 cups of coffee already today, because I only have 45 minutes to cover the material. There's about 40 slides. I'm not expecting to actually get through all 40 slides. There's no way I can do that. I will talk as fast as I can and cover whatever I can, and we'll kind of go from there. So let's look a little bit about what the sector looks like. And again, since most of you are from New York, we're going to kind of keep this maybe a little more New York centric. In the state of New York, there's about 117,854 nonprofit organizations. 16.6% of all employees are employed by nonprofit organizations. So nonprofit organizations are big business. That's up from about 14% about 10 or 12 years ago. 1.3 million New Yorkers work for nonprofits. That's about the same number of people that are employed by construction, manufacturing, finance, and insurance combined. So nonprofit is super big. Nonprofits add to the New York State economy more than $358 billion. And it's amazing how nonprofit organizations still don't seem to have a voice anywhere in the political realm in terms of setting policy and everything else, which completely makes no sense since the nonprofit sector is such a large component of things. If you see the chart in the lower right-hand corner, you can see where the nonprofit organizations are. There's about almost 16,000 on Long Island. I've always thrown around a statistic at about 3,500, so you can see how bad my math has been over the years. But again, there's a large number of nonprofit organizations out there. A lot of them are small, probably more than 50% of them are doing under $1 million worth of business, but still a tremendous level of nonprofit organizations out there in the marketplace. When we look at the nonprofit sector and where the challenges that the nonprofit sector is facing, funding is a big issue. I mean, government funding just doesn't seem to be able to foot the bill for the programs that the government expects nonprofit organizations to run. So 62% of nonprofit organizations are concerned about the funding of just basic operations. 24% of nonprofits are contemplating reducing services in 2024 due to lack of funding. 14% anticipate they're going to need a line of credit in order to be able to help fund operations. And if we look at the top challenges, they really boil down into 4 distinct categories. The first one's sustainability and funding. That's kind of a key issue for the nonprofit sector. Where's the money going to come from? How sustainable am I with the funding resources we have, which is then resulted in nonprofit organizations looking for other funding streams. Big push into the fundraising realm for some government-funded nonprofit organizations that never went into fundraising before. Board recruitment and engagement is probably the second biggest issue out there in terms of being able to recruit and engage board members, attracting and retaining staff, and keeping them happy. Staffing shortages, I mean, that's loosening up a little bit, but it's still a key issue in terms of the nonprofit sector. And then the increasing demand for services, the rising needs of the communities we serve, and nonprofits trying to remain relevant in terms of what they do. So if we're going to be talking about trends, I mean, you really can't talk about trends without some level of discussion about the economy and what's happening within the economy. So from a global economy perspective, there's a lot of uncertainty that is anticipated throughout the balance of 2024. I mean, if you think about it, there's still a lot of political elections that are going to be happening globally within 2024, including one here in the United States. There's a lot of unrest within the world. So those are still going to create a lot of uncertainty within the economy. And when you have uncertainty in the economy, that actually has a bearing on fundraising and everything else. Inflation is expected to lessen a little bit. For May, it was at 3.3%. The Fed target for the year was 2%. So we're still well above the Fed target. There was an anticipation that inflation was going to come down. And if you think about it, I mean, look at what's happened since COVID. So in 2021, we had inflation of about 4.7%. 2022, that jumped to 8%. 2023, that came down to about 4.1%. And so far through May, we're at 3.3%. So overall, in the last 3.5 years, we've experienced a 22% increase in costs due to inflation. And if you think about your rate increases that you've gotten over time or the money flow that's coming in, I don't know that there's a lot of nonprofit organizations that have seen a 22% increase in the funding that they've gotten in unless they're delivering a greater level of services. So that's been an issue. Unemployment rate for May of 2024 was about 4%. There were about 272,000 new jobs. Biggest gains were in healthcare, government, leisure and hospitality, and professional, scientific, and technical services. That 4% is up from 3.7% at the end of 2023. The expectation was that by the end of the year, we were going to be somewhere around 4%. So we're right about that now. So the question is, which way is unemployment going to teeter? Is it going to go a little bit higher? Or is it going to be a little bit lower? Banks, as we've talked about in the past, are taking a much more conservative approach to lending. It's not as easy to get bank financing anymore. They're looking for higher quality borrowers. They're asking for higher levels of collateral and everything else. The prime rate is up to 8.5%. We do anticipate that might come down a little bit by the end of the year. It's really going to come down to inflation and what happens with inflation. Right, the Feds, they continue to fluctuate the interest rate in order to control inflation and control the economy. If inflation stays up, the feds may increase interest rates. If the inflation starts to come down, the interest rate should hopefully come down with it. Again, we're not going to see interest rates around 3% like they were before the pandemic anytime soon. The S&P 500 is up about 10% year to date. That's important because charitable giving tends to follow the stock market. So as the stock market does well, the charitable giving does well too. We're expecting that the stock market will continue to have some additional gains, maybe another 3% or so by the end of the year. Charitable giving is predicted to grow by about 2.6% in 2024. That's scaled down from what it was at the beginning of the year. So while we do expect, and that, by the way, that's inflation adjusted. While we do expect charitable giving to be up this year, it was down in 2023. We don't expect it to be up as much as we originally thought it was going to be. And again, part of that has to do with the economic conditions we're seeing out there in the marketplace. Oops. Anybody who's following, in last month, or I guess it was maybe the previous month, the New York State budget was released. It was a $237 billion balanced budget. The overall cost of living adjustment that was in the budget was about 2.84%, which, as we just talked about, inflation is about 3.3. So the cost of living adjustment that you're getting in the budget is less than inflation. There was a bunch of things that were kind of implemented. They extended some tax credits in a hope to spur the growth of affordable housing, including converting unused office space. So they're trying to find ways to use some of that unused office space now that people are working a little bit more remotely into housing. Early intervention got a 5% rate increase, first rate increase they've gotten in about 20 years. There's been support. There's a lot of support for distressed hospitals across the state, an additional aid for safety net and patient-centered medical home models, increased reimbursement for certain mental health, about $304 million, $36 billion in total school aid, which is up a little over $1.4 billion, $1.4 billion to spur the innovation, including $80 million in capital funding. There's been some additional funding for the New York State Council of the Arts to support the arts sector with respect to capital construction. 1.4 billion for environmental issues. So there's some good dollars out there for the sector. A lot of mixed feelings in terms of the budget. I don't think the nonprofit sector feels that the cost of living adjustment was as high as it should have been. There were certain programs, there's a housing voucher program, there was immigrant legal services, there were health benefits that were shot down as part of the budget. So the budget didn't go as far as everybody had hoped it would go. So overall, how is the economy impacting nonprofit organizations? When we talk about nonprofit organizations, we tend to talk about nonprofits as an overall sector. The issue is that there's a lot of different pockets within the nonprofit sector. So things don't always function the same way for all entities within those pockets. So for health and welfare organization, if we see an increase in unemployment, what that typically means is that you're going to have more people who need services. We're seeing a widening gap between the have and have-nots, which means that we're also seeing a shrinkage in the number of people who are giving donations to nonprofit organizations. So kind of expect for health and welfare an increase in demand for services and fighting a little bit more in terms of the rank and file or the individual donations that are coming in. Arts and cultural organizations, kind of a mixed bag. As inflation comes down, and hopefully that comes under control, and market conditions improve with the stock market, people have a little bit more discretionary funds. And if they have more discretionary funds, they spend that money on experiences, which is what the arts and cultural offer. But the increased unemployment means that people could have lack of discretionary funding. So it kind of goes both ways. And from an education perspective, there's been a continued decline in the number of children being born each year. So there's less students, and you couple that with higher unemployment, and we're seeing challenges. All of the private school clients we work with are seeing, or almost all the private school clients we work with are seeing declines in enrollment. really can't talk about the state of the nonprofit sector in 2024 without talking about the presidential election. I'm not going to get into a political discussion here, but it is hampering economic growth. People are sitting back and waiting. People are in a holding pattern, waiting to see who wins and waiting to see what policy will be adopted by the new presidential regime or changes within the old presidential regime. So in terms of what that's going to look like is anybody's guess. One of the things that we're hearing about is something called reactionary donations. So what that basically means is that because there's such divisiveness between the two candidates and the people who are backing the two candidates, you're seeing people who are making donations. They're looking at what either President Biden or former President Trump is in favor of. And if that's not the candidate you're backing, they're making donations to things that fight against what the presidential candidates are looking for. So it could be an opportunity here, in terms of the nonprofit sector to kind of look at, what are the big issues that are on the table here within the presidential election and see if you can kind of tap into some of that. We don't know how the presidential election is going to impact market performance. Again, as I mentioned earlier, as the market goes, so typically goes donations. So hopefully, no matter what happens, we'll see some spurring of the market. And as I mentioned earlier, geopolitical concerns, terrorist conflicts, critical elections, and everything else are going to continue to have an impact on the economy. So what do organizations need coming out of where we are right now? Well, we need strong leadership, right? I mean, that's one of the key things that every business needs, and nonprofits, just like anything else, are businesses, as we talked about earlier. So we need strong leadership. 75% of organizational leadership is anticipated to leave their positions in the next 5 to 10 years. So we're talking about, upper level management. We're talking about C-suite staff. So it really puts a big push in terms of the need for succession planning within the nonprofit sector. And when they've surveyed the nonprofit sector, only about 27% of them have developed or have in place a succession plan. This may be easier for larger nonprofit organizations who have multiple layers of management, where you can kind of tap into some of those lower or middle management. Harder for smaller organizations who don't have those layers. Risk management, I think, something we've been talking to all of our clients about. We're talking about risk and the need to understand better risks. There's so many more risks in the nonprofit sector today than ever before. You've got compliance related issues, you've got cybersecurity threats and IT issues, AI, insurance exposure, staffing issues. You got new regulations coming out on a regular basis with respect to HR and staffing. Changing regulations, changing reimbursement methodologies, and everything else. So there are so many risks that are out there today. So anybody who isn't really focusing on those risks and maybe looking at developing a risk committee or giving the responsibility of understanding and evaluating risk to their audit committee, I think is doing the organization a little bit of a disservice, and they kind of need to kind of look at some of this stuff. Careful budgeting and cash flow monitoring is another big issue. Again, if you think about it, a lot of the federal funding that organizations have been relying on for the last 3 or 4 years is kind of off the table. The budget this year was a balanced budget at the state level, which is good, and the state was able to do that with the resources it had. But over the next couple of years, without those federal funds, there's going to probably be a tougher time for the state to handle this stuff. So there's going to be some level of uncertainty of revenue streams. We're all experiencing, or a lot of organizations are experiencing, cash flow delays, especially if you're in New York City or Suffolk County. New York City, the whole passport system has been fun. We'll use that word. I know we have some clients that have been waiting almost a year to get contracts signed on top of getting the money in from those contracts. We're going to be seeing, as we talked about, a rising demand for need that has to be factored into your budget. We have been seeing increased audit activity from governmental agencies, and monitoring and understanding the services and the provisions that are built into your contracts. Information flow is super important, and I think it's becoming a little bit easier with some of the AI additions that have been added to some of the software that is out there. I think there's not a single software application these days that doesn't have some level of AI component, but timely information is going to be critical for decision making within the nonprofit sector. We were talking to an organization the other day about the need to and we'll talk about a little bit later, the level of wealth transference that's going to be happening in this country over the next 15 to 20 years. And we were talking about, what ability they have to go back and look at their prior donors and what have the donors have been giving for and everything. And they said they really don't have any good information to look at in terms of really understanding donation patterns. If you don't have timely information and you don't have good information and you're not tracking all that information, you're not going to be able to make strategic decisions as you move forward. Proper planning and strategic thinking is going to be super important. If you think about it, during the COVID years, organizations were somewhat reactionary, right? You were reacting to new rules and regulations. We were in a whole period of uncertainty. Nobody really knew what to do, what the world was going to look like under COVID, trying to do things remotely and everything. Not that COVID is over, but it's not the same as it was, back in 2020 and 2021. We have to get back to being strategic thinking. We have to get back to kind of looking at things a whole lot differently and being prospective in our thought processes as opposed to really looking at things from a crisis management perspective. So things like collaborations, partnerships, maybe even merger are things that should be on the table and being talked about. I think we need to look at our board makeup and engagement. I think the days of having boards or bringing on board members only because they have deep pockets and can contribute money is gone. I think we're now looking at boards in terms of, are they representative of our organization? Are they representative of the communities we serve? Do they have the skill sets we need in order to be able to effectively govern the organization? And I think, the board makeup has to be completely different today than it was pre-COVID. Also rethink operations and relevancy of the organization. Are you really, doing what you should be doing as an organization? Are you really continuing to be relevant? Are you effective? All of those things are things you should be looking at. And if you've expanded over the years because you followed the money and, maybe you've had some mission creep, does it make sense to go back and look at some of that mission creep and determine really if you're in a situation where some of that mission creep no longer makes sense for the organization because maybe you're losing money on these programs and you could be more effective doing other things. Advocacy has always been important. It continues to be important and will be even more important. As we just talked about, the governor's budget kind of fell short in certain areas. They need to hear your voice. The nonprofit sector is a big component. I don't think anybody realizes how big the nonprofit sector is. We talked about, almost 17% of everybody employed is employed by a nonprofit organization. And I don't think your voice is being heard as much as it should. So we need to continue to advocate for the needs of the nonprofit sector and the need for the people who work for you. If you're in a healthcare or direct service where you have direct service providers, receiving minimum wage, I mean, that's not fair wage. And we have to push for, more fair wages and everything else. And that has to be funded by someone. And then DEIA continues to be an issue, and we have to continue to find ways to integrate and ensure that we really are reflective of the populations we're serving. Talked a little bit about minimum wage. I want to talk, moving on from the economy, talk a little bit about some of the new regulations that are out there. You may hear about some of these, later on during the day, but just wanted to touch on them here. Minimum wage for 2024 was increased to $16 an hour for New York City, Long Island, Westchester, $15 an hour for the rest of the state. It's going to increase by 50 cents an hour for 25 and 26, and then it's going to be cost of living adjusted thereafter. So just kind of keep that in mind. There was a new law that goes into effect on January 1st, 2025. It's a federal law. It's the Unemployment Recession and Readiness Act. If you haven't heard about it, go take a look at it or talk to your insurance broker about it. It deals with the modernization of the unemployment system. The unemployment system was tapped really hard when COVID hit, and they're trying to kind of update it so that could handle another crisis should something happen. But that is going to come with a price tag. And the price tag that I've heard from individuals is about 131% increase in unemployment rates. So what it's going to do is going to provide longer periods of unemployment coverage, and it's going to be dependent on the unemployment rate within the various communities. It's going to cover 75% of salaries instead of 50%. So nonprofit organizations do have the ability here in New York State to opt out of the state unemployment system. Just have to keep in mind, if you do choose to opt out of the state unemployment system and you do have some high turnover, you could get stuck holding a pretty big price tag for that. So you may want to think about or do some analysis to see if it still makes sense to stay self-funded in the unemployment system. The New York City Mayor's Office of Contract Services is working on creating a single audit with supporting schedules, which will be audited each year by your external auditors. What they're hoping to do is they're hoping to streamline the government audit process so that you're not in a situation where you're going to be audited by a lot of different governmental agencies. And what that'll mean is that you're going to be putting a lot more analysis and schedules within your audited financial statements to cover the various funding sources that you have. So just keep in mind, we're monitoring it. We'll give you more information as it becomes available. We haven't seen what any of those reports look like yet. So as this stuff becomes available, we'll be pushing it out to the field, but just keep in mind that this is coming along and it should be out there hopefully within the next, well, hopefully within the next 6 months. Something that we have reported to you guys in the past, but just want to make sure everybody has seen this. There are new thresholds going out for exempt employees. So as you know, you can have employees who are exempt, and that means that they don't get paid overtime, or you can have non-exempt employees. The rules regarding exempt employees are a little complex in terms of what constitutes an exempt employee, but one of the factors is the salary that employees are receiving. And if a salary that an employee is receiving is below the threshold, they're not exempt. The threshold for that's going into effect on July 1st, so Monday, is $844 a week or $43,888 per year. That's the federal side. 1128 on January 1st, 2025. So the salary goes up to $58,656, and thereafter it's going to be updated automatically every 3 years. So if you think about it, if you have any staff that are getting paid under $58,656, they cannot be an exempt employee. Now here in New York, those numbers are even higher. So for 2025, that number is going to be in the New York downstate area, $64,350, and the upstate area in the rest of New York is $60,406. And in 2026, that's going up even higher. So again, if your staff are getting paid less than that, they cannot be exempt employee and they have to get overtime. So again, just want to make sure that you guys are aware of some of these regulatory changes that are taking place. I know that you wear a lot of different hats and it's hard to really understand what's going on out there. You really can't talk about trends without talking about fundraising, since that's probably one of the most important things that are on the mind of most nonprofit organizations. So some of the statistics that are out here, and we're big as accountants, we're big on statistics. For one-time gifts, the average donation is about $121. And for recurring gifts, the average is about $25. The one thing to keep in mind is the number of people who are donating to nonprofit organizations is way down. There's less than 50% of all individuals give to nonprofit organizations as of 2023. 20 years ago, that was up over 70%. So you have less and less people giving to nonprofit organizations. In 2023, as I mentioned before, we had seen a decline, inflation impacted decline in giving. We were down 2.1% in 2023. Like I said, we do expect that that's going to be up a little bit in 24 and in 25. But again, we're not talking about increases of 10, 15%. We're talking about, modest increases. Overall donations in 2023 were about 6.5 billion, around 4.8 million donors. A couple things that are kind of stray statistics here on the fundraising side, but I think it's important. When there was a study done and only about 5% of individuals believe that they have received services from nonprofits. And I bring this up because that just basically means that we as a nonprofit sector are not doing a great job of really talking about what it is we do. And I don't think that people realize how much the nonprofit sector touches every one of them or their families. So I think if we could do some sort of concerted push, and if people aren't understanding, you really think the politicians are understanding. So I think we need to do some sort of concerted push to try to continue to get the message out about what the nonprofit sector does and what the nonprofit sector means to everyone. If you can get people to provide, and I mentioned on the previous slide that the average recurring donation is about $25. If we can get people to do recurring donations, the donors give about 42% more when they do recurring donations than one-time donors. So what I would suggest is if you are doing an ask for donations, give people an option of putting in for a recurring donation. So that should be one of the options that you offer people when you're asking for donations. Try to get people to people do it all the time, right? Upsell. So 35%, and this is just one of the, obviously there are different income categories, but one of the categories, individuals making between 100,000 and 500,000, which is probably one of the bigger categories that you have here on Long Island and Westchester and parts of New York City. 35% of the people making between those dollar thresholds claim charitable deductions averaging about $3,305 a year. So it only represents about 2.9 of their income, but is the largest level of contributions that are going to the nonprofit sector. So the largest level of contributions of any income range is the $100,000 to $500,000 income range. So even though it's the smallest level of contributions based on income, it still happens to be the largest sector. So if you're going after donations, this is one of the income ranges you want to focus on, because it is the income range that is giving the largest amount per year. Another thing to think about is, 57% of nonprofit website traffic comes from mobile and tablet devices, but 75% of donations still come from desktop users. So you do have to make sure that your website and everything can be seen in both on both a mobile device perspective as well as from a computer perspective. And you have to give people the ability to donate in both areas, but more people are still donating from desktop. And I think part of the reason for that is the largest donations still come from the older people. And 67% of donors are nonprofit volunteers. And I bring that up because if you can get people to volunteer for your organization, you'll have a higher likelihood of getting them to donate to your organization too. So, start with the volunteering piece and then see if you can get them to donate from there. Some things to kind of think about. We talked about it, optimizing your website, make your donation process as easy as humanly possible. You want to streamline that donation process as much as possible. Storytelling is super important. People want to understand the impact they're making. People want to understand where the dollars are going. So it's really important to kind of get that messaging out. People want to relate to your organization. They want to relate to how you're helping people. So the more you can kind of get your message out there, the more you can differentiate yourself from everybody else who's looking for donations, the better off you're going to be. It's also important to build relationships with donors, even more important than ever before. You have to really understand what your donors are looking for from your organization. And that comes with the information flow that we talked about earlier. If you can have information and you can understand why people are giving to your organization, how much people are giving to your organization, what motivates the people who are giving to your organization, look at what other things or other organizations or other websites the people that are donating to your organization are visiting. You can then kind of build a profile of what your donors look like and go out and solicit donations from other people who look just like the donors that are giving to your organization. Also, it's important to be able to have those conversations to understand why they support you, what are they looking for from your organization, so that maybe they can become larger donors as we move on, or maybe even start looking at some planned giving opportunities with respect to the donors that you're working with. You want to leverage partnerships. One of the things that, I think most of you know, we have a partnership with an organization called the Book Fairies. And we love our partnership with Book Fairies because it's a two-way partnership. Book Fairies does a lot to promote us as an organization, as an accounting firm. And we do a lot to promote Book Fairies. And as part of what we do, for every billable hour we have as a firm, we put a book in the hands of a child. And those partnerships, those two-way streets, those ability to sit down with your corporate sponsors and your corporate donors and then have the conversation of how your organization could be more integrated into their marketing, more integrated into their purpose and mission, I think is super important. So the more you can kind of leverage your relationships, leverage the partnerships, I think that's going to go a long way. Again, as we talked about already, leveraging donor data, making sure that if you have information, you can take that information and really do a deeper dive in terms of why your donors are giving to you, what they're giving, what motivates them to give. Because if you can target your ask to a donor, they're going to be much more likely to give, and they're going to give more. Social media engagement is important too. Embrace video. They say that a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, if a picture's worth 1,000 words, what is a video worth? So people want a quick hit. People want, especially, the Gen Zs and the Gen X, they want to be able to see a quick video and then be able to react. So the more that you can increase how you're doing things through videos and stuff, the better off you're going to be. A little bit about the various generations. So, I'm going to go through this quick because I don't have a whole lot of time left. So you have 5 generations, right? You have the silent generation. It makes up about 11.8% of the US population. 88% of them donate annually to nonprofit organizations. The annual gift is about 1,367, and you can see roughly how or what they respond best to: direct mail, phone calls. And they're the group right now that you need to talk to regarding planned giving, them and the baby boomers. Baby boomers make up 23.6% of the US population. 72% of them donate annually. Average annual gift is about $1,200. And 58% of them attend fundraising events. 49% of them are enrolled in monthly giving campaigns, and 71% of them volunteer. Remember what I said before: if you have volunteers, they're more likely to give. Gen X represents 20.4% of the population. About 59% of them donate annually. They respond best to text messages, email, social media, crowdfunding. 56% attend fundraising events, 49% enrolled in monthly giving campaigns, and 64% of them volunteer. Millennials are about 25.9% of the population. 84% of them donate. Average gift is about $481, but again, 84% of them donate. 40% enrolled in monthly giving campaigns. We'll watch online videos before giving. So again, that goes back to what we were talking about. And 64% of millennials volunteer. And then Gen Z will represent 82 million Americans by 2026. 93% of them plan to make financial contributions in 2024. 91% of them plan to sponsor. They are probably the more socially responsible generation. So again, if you can tap into them now and get them involved in your organization, you're setting the kind of the stage for later giving to your organization. As I mentioned, you're going to see over the next 20 to 25 years, the largest level of wealth transference that's ever taken place in this country. The number is about 84 trillion in assets is going to change hands. 72.6 trillion to heirs and about 11.9 trillion going to charity. So I guess my question to you is, what are you guys doing in order to tap into and get your share of that $11.9 trillion that's expected to go to charity? What are you doing in terms of talking to your older donors, especially your older, larger donors, and trying to get an introduction or understand their family or meet their family so you can keep those donations coming after the matriarch and patriarch of the family are gone? Have you talked to your donors about planned giving? What are you doing in terms of some of the younger donors who are going to be inheriting some of this money down the road? So, you have a lot of work to do in terms of cultivating relationships with your donors. And you can see the little pie chart there kind of shows you where the dollars are sitting. The silent generation sitting on about 18 trillion. Baby boomers have the lion's share of the money at 78.29 trillion. Gen X has about 48 trillion, and the millennials have about 14 trillion. So your silent generation, your baby boomers, account for about $96 trillion. Some of the fundraising trends we're seeing out there, and I'm going to kind of go through some of these fairly quickly. Artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, AI, is a super important tool that you should be looking at. It allows you to analyze past donations, social media, website interactions. You can use it to develop personalized appeals and targeted email campaigns. As I said before, the more personalized your campaign, the more likely it is you're going to be in a situation where you'll be able to attract larger dollars and get larger donations. It gives you the ability, like I said, to increase your conversion rate, helps you to better understand who's giving to your organization, so you can go out there and pinpoint using algorithms, additional individuals who might also be likely to give to your organization, and kind of reach out to them so you can expand your donor base. Gives you predictive analytics. So if you're doing fundraising events and everything, you can kind of get a better idea of what you can expect from a budgeting perspective and how to allocate resources effectively. You can use AI chatbots to communicate with your donors on a regular basis. And one of the big things that donors complain about is lack of communication, lack of information. You can set all of that up so that all of that information is getting out there to your donors on a regular basis. You can use virtual reality for storytelling. Again, the more you can make or create immersive experiences and let people understand how their dollars are being used to impact the services that you provide, it goes a long way. You can use it to maximize social media. You can better understand the best times to post. You can use it to better understand what sort of posts you should do, how often, and frequencies, and everything else. Everybody likes games. You can kind of use AI to create platforms to gamify your donations. You can award points, unlock badges, all of those things, so that kind of donating becomes kind of a bit of a game. People are competitive in nature. You can use it to cultivate long-term relationships. You can use it for, recommending or creating event interactions. So people go to an event, you can do follow-up and stuff like that with people after events that are taking place, so that people feel like there's ongoing relationship, as opposed to they came to an event or made a one-time donation and that was it. And you can use it to, again, empower your fundraising department or your development department by giving them more data-driven information to make better decisions. From a recruiting perspective, obviously it continues to be a tight labor market, even though we've seen some loosening of it. We went from 3.7% unemployment at the end of 2023. We're at about 4%. There's still a lot of places where the nonprofit sector is having some difficulties. Some of that is obviously your program and service delivery, shortage of teachers, shortage of healthcare workers, shortage of, from an entry-level perspective, DSPs. Fiscal people are hard to find. Development people, we get asked all the time, does anybody know anybody from a development perspective, because we're looking. So, and then with the whole retirement of or leaving of upper level management, senior management is a key issue. So again, I think there's always going to be an issue in terms of finding and attracting talent within the nonprofit sector. And again, I think there's several reasons, right? I mean, there's a certain level of salary disparity. How do you differentiate your organization if the for-profit organizations are giving more money? Limited benefits, and how do you make a more robust benefit package out there for your staff? Compensation trends, there's, and I'll leave this information out there, but it's tough to kind of meet the salary demands of top talent. And how do you do that with limited resources, especially if the government's not giving you the money they need to run programs? Limited resources, many nonprofits lack resource for comprehensive career development. I think one of the biggest issues that we find in the nonprofit sector is I think the nonprofit sector does not do an effective job of communicating with their younger staff about what the upward mobility within the organization is. There have been studies done where 44% of employees who left the nonprofit said they left because the organization didn't offer enough opportunities for career growth or professional development. And 38% of young nonprofit professionals think they will need to move in order to get an agency promotion, because nonprofits are not having those conversations about upward mobility within their organizations. So again, something that needs to be kind of stressed. I'm pretty much running out of time at this point. There's a lot of other slides here, and I'm sorry that I didn't kind of get to all of them. Just kind of understand that the issues are the issues, right? We have work-life balance issues. We have burnout risk, mental health issues, lack of empathy at the top in some certain organizations, lack of awareness that, what the career paths are going to be. Instability, where people don't really understand nonprofit organizations, don't really understand that nonprofit organizations are businesses and can generate profitability. So, the one last thing I want to just talk about before I kind of bounce out is you're in a situation where, if you think about the workforce and the fact I said earlier that you're going to have 4 generations within the workforce at the same time, that puts a whole lot of stress on your leadership and on management style and everything else. And when you think about it, a lot of us learned our management style from the people we work for. And a lot of that management style came down from baby boomers. And if you try to take a baby boomer management style and you take that baby boomer management style and you try to push it down to Gen Z, they're not going to respond. They're not going to respond well, because that's not the way they think. So really, one of the things that I want to make sure people take from this is you have to kind of think about kind of retooling your management and making sure that your management truly understands that if they're going to be effective leaders, they have to lead to the people that they're leading and not go with a one-size-fits-all mentality. So you might have to spend a little money to retool your management, but I think in the long run, I think that'll help to keep employees engaged within your organization. Again, I apologize that I'm running out of time and I can't do more than that. There's plenty of slides. If anybody has any questions, my contact information is on the last slide. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have. Thanks everybody for participating, and I will see you later this afternoon at the nonprofit panel. Thanks all.